Well, good morning, and welcome to day number 2 of our 2019 Community Engagement Conference. I hope those of you that are from the Columbus area had a relaxing night at home last night, and those of you that are from across the state of Ohio had a wonderful opportunity to get out with some of your colleagues and friends and enjoy a good dinner and meal and such here in Columbus. So again, welcome back to day number 2. We seem to have a late arriving crowd here this morning, but we want to make sure that we start on time today so that we have appropriate time for the panel and we aren't behind on going into our sessions. You know, I'm Roger Rennekamp. I'm Associate Dean of the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences and also Director of Ohio State University Extension. And I want to once again thank my partner in crime here, Dr. Stephen Myers, the Associate Vice Provost for Outreach and Engagement, who has been a great partner as we've moved along with this project the last couple of years. You know, I think for those of you that are attending your first Community Engagement Conference here at Ohio State, I want to tell you a little bit about how we came about doing this. And I think Stephen and I, a couple of years ago, had kind of a Reese's Peanut Butter Cup moment where we decided, you know, like on the commercial says, that sometimes chocolate and peanut butter go well together. And the reason I say that is that because for many, many years, we had an extension annual conference where we invited all of our county extension educators and staff from across the state to come together for a couple of days. We called that our annual Extension Annual Conference. And then simultaneously, a little later in the year, we were also holding, Stephen, we had an engagement forum where all the folks on campus who wanted to reach out to communities were together. And we thought that it might make sense for all of those folks to come together, both the people that are working in our 88 counties across the state of Ohio, as well as those people on campus who were trying to engage with those communities. So last year was our first year to have a community engagement conference, and we focused last year on health and wellness, this year on sustainability, and will likely be another theme next year. So the two purposes that we try to accomplish with the community engagement conference is to connect people, connect on and off campus in pursuit of collaboration and partnership that help us meet the needs of the people of the state of Ohio, and also to each year provide a forum for learning about contemporary issues that we're trying to address in the state of Ohio. So with that, I was going to do a little activity of self-disclosure here, but our number's a little small this morning, so we'll dispense with that. So we'll move straight into our panel this morning, and our moderator for the panel is also one of our partners in crime. Dr. Linda Weavers is an endowed chair and professor in the Department of Civil, Environmental, and Geodetic Engineering at Ohio State University. In addition, Dr. Weavers is co-director of the Ohio Water Resources Center. Dr. Weavers' research is multi-pronged with expertise in developing water treatment technologies, promoting innovation in the water industry, and determining the fate of emerging contaminants in the water system. Dr. Weavers has over 100 publications and 1 patent. In addition to her research, Dr. Weavers coordinates the capstone course for environmental engineering and teaches a study abroad course on sustainability and resilience in Italy. She's past president of the Association of Environmental Engineering and Science Professors. And we thank Linda, also one of our co-conspirators in putting together this conference as part of our design team for the conference. But I'd like to invite Dr. Weavers and the panelists to please take their places here on stage. We're looking forward to a wonderful discussion here over the next hour. So let's welcome Dr. Weavers and our panelists.
Well, good morning. Welcome to day 2 of the Community Engagement Conference. Yesterday, for me, was an inspiring day. I learned a lot from the keynote speaker, who's very inspiring, from panelists in the morning and the lunch session, and also during the breakout session speakers. So I thought all in all, it was a great day. I expect good things as well today as it was yesterday. So I think the agenda says that this is the opening panel for day 2. Is that right? So it's kind of a surprise as to what it is. So here's the big reveal, right? That's what we do these days. It's on water. I'm the co-director, as Roger said, I'm the co-director for the Ohio Water Resources Center. And I'm also, last night was a launch of the Sustainability Institute, and I'm the co-lead for the area of healthy land, water, and air. So as you might imagine, I think a lot about water. So water. Ken was just having a sip there, one of our panelists. We don't often think a lot about water and where that water came from and kind of what happens to it before it gets to us. But if we think about, water comes out of our tap, and we don't think about what happens when we flush it, right? But it's really foundational to our communities. If you think about it, when communities were initially settled, what's a key ingredient to deciding where to settle? Water, right? A source of water. So generally, it was surface water at that time, right? You want to have a water that you can drink, but you also want to have water to convey things. So those things are people, those things are goods, and those things are also the waste that we want to kind of get rid of. So having water and access to safe drinking water is typically one of the first considerations that we think about. We think about it after hurricanes or disasters like tornadoes and earthquakes. One of the first things that happens in a community is, what about our water? How is that water infrastructure? Do we still have water that's available for our people in our communities? So water is very foundational to sustainability. Without water, we're not going to be able to be sustainable at all. So yesterday, a lot of the focus was about connecting communities with ideas and how to do that, how to message well with citizens about these ideas on things like sustainability. And in terms of sustainability, there's been a bit of a focus really on our carbon footprint. How do we think about reducing that? About waste, the waste that we produce and how to reduce that. And also energy use is linked to that. There's a lot of discussion about that. So water is really a surprising piece to this energy puzzle that we don't often think about. I do, and people in my community do, but probably the general citizen does not. So water flows out of our tap even when the power goes out, right? So how on earth could they be linked? So how they're linked is that we need we need energy in order to make the water get to our homes. And that will happen even when the power goes out, which is really a cool feature, right? So energy is actually required in all stages of water and wastewater. And it's a big cost in getting water to our homes and the water that leaves. Water and wastewater, if you put those two together, they're typically the largest proportion of energy in a municipality's energy budget. About 35% of the energy budget goes toward water and wastewater. And maybe you guys, especially Director Davies, maybe you can back me up on that. And if you break that down into drinking water and getting it to our homes versus the wastewater, the proportion of the energy that's needed in the drinking water side, 90% of that is just pumping it to our homes. So getting it to our homes and that pumping aspect that we don't even think about because it happens when the power even goes out. So linking water and water in the energy discussion is really an important piece that we often don't think about. So I think we need to include that, and that's why it's very important in the Sustainability Institute as well when we think about climate change issues. So I'm very excited to have this panel here today to talk to us and learn, hopefully we can learn many things from them about challenges related to water and communities and how we can tackle those problems, and as people at the university and engaging with them, and what we can do maybe better to help move things along. So our three panelists, I'm going to introduce who our panelists are first, and then I posed some questions to them ahead of time and particularly one question so that they could introduce a water challenge that they're facing within their community right now. So that question that I posed to them was, what do you see as emerging water challenges associated with your organization? And so they're going to have some PowerPoint slides to describe that to you, and then we're going to go into a more traditional panel format. So our first speaker is David Rankin, and David Rankin is the Executive Director at the Great Lakes Protection Fund. So in this role, he's responsible for all aspects of the fund's activities, including responsible investment of the fund's endowment, budgeting, planning, and resource management, recruiting, developing, and retaining top talent, and directing all of these resources to advance the fund's mission. David previously served as the fund's Vice President of Programs. He has also held senior positions with the Nature Conservancy, the US EPA, and state environmental protection agencies. He has negotiated international conservation agreements, testified as an expert witness in environmental litigation, designed new conservation and environmental protection programs, and drafted environmental laws and regulations. He has a bachelor's degree in environmental science from Miami University, so he is an Ohioan. He has a master's in business administration and was awarded high honors from the University of Chicago. Our second panelist is Ken Heigel. Ken Heigel is the Assistant Director of the Ohio Water Development Authority. Ken has served as the Assistant Director since January of 2018, and prior to that, as a Chief Engineer since March of 2003. He has over 30 years of experience in the water and wastewater industry in the areas of design, construction, and funding. Mr. Heigel has a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's degree in business administration from the University of Dayton. He's also a licensed professional engineer in the state of Ohio. Our third panelist is Director Robert Davis, and as the director of the City of Cleveland's Department of Public Utilities, he is responsible for management and oversight of more than 1,700 employees, a budget of more than $600 million, and all operations within the divisions of Cleveland Public Power, Cleveland Water Pollution Control, and Utilities Fiscal Control, as well as the citywide Office of Radio Communications and Cleveland's public access channel, TV20. Director Davies has a strong foundation of both administration and hands-on experience, having risen through the ranks throughout his 32 career as a utility professional. He holds a Class 4 water license and has been a member of the American Water Works Association for more than 30 years. Director Davis currently serves as the board of directors of the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies and the Cleveland Water Alliance. He is also past chair of the Ohio section of AWWA. So with that, I would like to invite Mr. Rankin to come up and to talk to us a little bit about the Great Lakes Protection Fund and some of the challenges associated with that.
Thanks, Linda. These folks are my heroes. Look at what they do. They design, finance, and operate the systems that deliver 3/4 of a ton of the world's cleanest water to our homes every day, take it away when we're done using it, and it costs less than a cup of coffee downstairs. That's remarkable. That's remarkable. Let's give them a hand. And those of you that know Dave LaFrance can tell him I stole his comments. This is a honor to be here, and I'm thrilled. I'm going to try to do three things in the next 5 minutes or so. Number one, set some context, building on Linda's remarks. Number two, say a bit about the Great Lakes Protection Fund. And number three, then answer the question that I was asked to answer, which is what are the challenges that we see, more importantly, that experts that advise us see in protecting the ecological health and human use of 20% of the world's fresh surface water. So let's jump in. There's home, right? It's the blue marble. 70% of our planet is covered by water. The white stuff in the picture is also water. We're the water planet. And when we look at the challenge of getting human needs satisfied by having drinkable, fishable, and swimmable water, I want to set some context around that because it ends up being difficult on a planet that's water dominated for this reason. 97% of it is too salty to meet those needs. So we start by taking a lot of the resources we have off of the table that we can't access without extreme expense and extreme environmental impact to meet our human needs. So we're left with 3% of that water resource on this blue planet being available to meet those needs. And, well, today anyway, 2/3 of that is locked up in ice, polar ice caps and glaciers and so on. It may not be that way forever or for long perhaps, but this is the picture that we're starting to see when we talk about freshwater resources. These are the things in the surface and in the ground that we have to use. And when you look at surface waters, as Linda said, which is the kind of thing that we use to transport waste and for easy access to drinking water, that's what's left. There is something up there, at least there's intended to be something up there. So we start with a framing exercise of saying that what we're talking about is, in fact, a relatively scarce global resource. And the other dimension of it is that it is a resource that is not evenly distributed. You go to the north coast of this state, and there is 20% of the world's fresh surface water sitting in Lake Erie and its sister Great Lakes. We're very lucky. We have water abundance problems in this state, not water scarcity problems, or at least not water scarcity problems like occur elsewhere on the planet. But it's not evenly shared, so it's scarce and it's distributed in a lumpy fashion. That's where we begin. That's where we begin to say, okay, how do we think about driving a sustainability agenda for fresh water? Scarce, unevenly distributed. That means, tension, conflict, and the need to be smart about what we do. So to help this region do that, some 30 years ago, the governors of the Great Lakes states created the Great Lakes Protection Fund. We're a private corporation endowed with a tranche of public money where the founding governors set up 3 simple rules about the institution. Number 1, you can't spend any public money. Number 2, you can't do anybody else's job. You can't fund public works obligations or compliance obligations or take on the responsibilities of government or the private sector or anything like that. Number 3, with those 2 constraints, figure out what the biggest problems are and build innovative solutions that make it easier to protect the resource, that stretch the $15 billion of public spend that goes into that resource every year so that it's more effective, and so that we can get the job done faster. So we have at the fund a portfolio of 20 projects representing an investment of $16 million looking at the energy-water nexus, looking at how water utilities can operate their systems to minimize carbon footprint, to minimize mercury footprint, to minimize cost expense. We have projects looking at how the port futures of the region can be more self-sustaining and become regenerative in an ecological sense. We have projects that are looking at how we can better manage the threat of invasive species. So that's the nutshell of the fund. We're an innovation funder, and we're an 8-person shop. So we lean heavily on people in this room and other places to not only do the work that we can help finance, but to advise us on where the targets really are. So we've just concluded an exercise that went to some 52 experts and did extensive interviews to say, okay, what are the threats? What are the things that we as a region are not prepared to address in the next 5 to 15 years, that we need better solutions for. And that kind of, hate to call it a panel because it's so big, but that collection of experts identified 5 top thematic areas that probably will not be a surprise to the folks in this room, but let me share them. Number 1 is a changing climate. And if that formulation is a trigger word of some kind that causes consternation, we don't need to talk about it that way. The issue that climate change presents for us, water's the face of climate change, and it appears in our region as more water in more intense storms, coupled with less water in longer drought periods. We're driving water to the tails of the distribution that we think we knew what it was, and it's different now. So a changing climate was top of mind for most of these panelists, and in particular, the changing precipitation patterns. Second is, and it's coupled with this, right, is chronic underinvestment in infrastructure. And it is a problem we face in this region that it was identified by the Great Lakes Commission that we have just on the U.S. side, a $178 billion need to maintain the level of service in our drinking water and wastewater infrastructures. Wow, $178 billion need to stay even, not dialing in the fact that there's a changing climate. Third is and again, it's coupled with the first two, is a problem of nutrient enrichment and the symptoms of algae blooms, both harmful and otherwise, that we've seen come back in this region and other places globally. Fourth, the challenge of invasive species. Again, invasive species is tied to those other issues. Lake Erie is more sensitive to phosphorus now because of the presence of invasive mussels than it was. Lake Michigan has cladophora problems that it wouldn't have but for the presence of invasive mussels. So there's an invasive species challenge. And last, there are changing demographics and economic uses of water. It doesn't stretch the imagination to say that the water crisis in Flint, Michigan is due, at least in part, to the infrastructure being sized for the largest concentration of automobile manufacturing in the world. When GM and Chrysler left Flint and shut down those massive operations that the water infrastructure was designed to serve, the water infrastructure simply did not work as well. And while it probably doesn't stack up as a top driver of that problem, it certainly is a contributing factor. And that pattern repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats in our region, where there's a mismatch between the size of water infrastructure we have and the needs it needs to fill. So those are the challenges that we see. Linda, I think I'll stop there and yield the floor to people probably smarter than I am. Thank you.
Ken, would you like to talk to us about what you see as the big water challenges?
Thanks, Linda, and thanks, Dave. Again, I am privileged to be here to talk to you about challenges we have in the water industry, water professionals. The Ohio Water Development Authority is the largest funding agency in Ohio to fund water and sewer, and we've been in existence for 50 years, so we're in our 51st year as of now. So we've done some great things over those 50 years. And I liked your graph on the limited resource that we have with water. I'll add to that, we have the same amount of water we did thousands of years ago that we'll have in the future. It's not getting any more or any less. We just have to maintain the use of that water and recycle and sustain it. Let's see, figure out my little buttons up here. Okay, there we go. So when Linda asked me the question, what's the challenge in your industry? I came up with this statement. If we read this statement, you're going to see many challenges within the statement. And that's part of the challenge, is how all these other major challenges affect each other. And we're constantly bringing these challenges and seeing how they impact the other challenge to move the ball forward. So I have up here, maintaining sustainable public water system, water and sewer systems with aging infrastructure while meeting environmental regulations and minimizing rate increases to a declining user base. Okay, let's start at the very end, that declining user base. If you're from Columbus, you know we're not in a declining population, all right? We're getting, we have lots of development here in central Ohio, other parts of the state. But if we look at the state as a whole, I'm going to jump 2 more. The red are our declining populations, the counties and declining populations. So as you can see, the I-71 corridor is doing just fine, all right? The issue for us in the water profession is dealing with those counties in red, pink, and white. If we look on the eastern part of our state, 14 of those counties are in Appalachian, all right? This is the poorest part of Ohio. So that brings us to minimizing that rate increase. There's an affordability issue, right? We have got to sustain those water systems in those those regions of declining in low poverty. That's the challenge. Which brings me to one of the things that we have started in Ohio is the asset management rule. This came into effect in November of last year. It's a part of Ohio Revised Code. All public water systems are now required to have an asset management plan. There are 4,500 public water systems in Ohio. You probably think that's a lot, and that is a lot. 4,500. So we have 4,500 systems that are managed by licensed operators, run by elected officials, making sure they're providing safe drinking water and meeting regs to their customers. So EPA thought it was important that we introduce this concept of asset management. And the whole concept of asset management in 2 words, criticality and condition. What's the condition of your asset? What's going to happen if it breaks? What happens if you're going to have a water line break in this part of the town? What happens if you're going to have harmful algal blooms break through? All right? That's the criticality, and we have to start thinking about that. The challenge here now is, yes, you can go out, they can hire consultants, they can put these plans together, but we don't want that plan to sit on the shelf. It's really starting to have to change the way water and wastewater systems are operated. They have to build this asset management component into their daily structure to make sure they're thinking about all these concepts. The first thing you do is identify those assets. What are the condition of those assets? What's the risk? The exposure if something breaks? How much time is left on that asset? When's that asset going to need to be replaced? And finally, what's that funding look like, that long-term funding strategy? Too many communities, small communities, and these small systems, it fails. So there is no money left. Okay? They don't have money in the bank to go replace a pump, to replace a line. All right? That's when we get involved and help them with the financing package. But we want these communities, we want these systems to start thinking holistic and kind of planning for that future. When do you have to replace that line? When do you have to replace that pump? So there's challenges out there. We can get there. Again, we've got to work together across the board with our researchers, the elected officials, to increase the awareness of the value of water, the true cost of water, and what it takes to really operate that system, and what the consumer should be paying for that water. You know, there's a lot of discussion. We don't want to raise rates. I won't get reelected if I raise rates, and so on. So we've got to break that we've got to open that conversation and open those conversations to make sure that true value of water is known. Thank you.
Robert, I'd like to hear about the city of Cleveland.
Thank you, Linda, for that introduction. And it is certainly an honor and a privilege to be here. My daughter graduated from The Ohio State University a couple of years ago, so it is great to be back on campus. I have entitled my opening remarks, as a water equity framework because the concept of water equity really provides an approach to think about the multiple challenges that we face holistically. So before we define water equity, let's get into some of the challenges that we are attempting to address. I want to provide a little bit of context. Let me change that. Thank you. So we wanted to really look at our mission, vision, and value for the division of water. We're using this framework to shape our organization. So if you look at our mission, you can see that we are providing a reliable, safe drinking water. And you can see the word equity that is in that, and that is no accident because we're focused on that. We are building a mission statement that reflects our values, and most specifically, affordability and inclusiveness is what we're trying to attempt to do, as I've instructed my staff to take a very, very close look at as we look at equity as we move forward in our sustainability efforts. So what is equity? Water equity, for those who are not familiar with it, water equity occurs when the community has access to safe, clean, affordable drinking water and wastewater services that is resilient with facing of floods and droughts and other climate risks, and a role that in decision-making process as it relates to water management and the equities and the communities that we face. And this also includes the most vulnerable communities that face historic and contemporary barriers of economic and social opportunities, looking at a healthy environment. So, as we look at water equity, we have a tendency to focus on the equity simply as a question of affordability. And without a doubt, affordability is a concern. But water equity is much broader, as the U.S. Alliance has perhaps the most comprehensive approach to equity-based pillars. The first is to ensure that we have clean, safe, affordable water service, looking that really touches on the issue of affordability, equity, and treatment infrastructure, distribution, and things of that type nature. The second is to maximize the economic benefit, water infrastructure investment, which really speaks to contracting as well as workforce development. The third is to foster the framework and the resilience in looking at the climate change. So let's look at why is this framework important to the city of Cleveland. We have a very large system. In fact, we are the 9th largest water system in the country. We provide 1.5 million customers across Northeast Ohio. Our customers spread across 80 communities and 5 counties. So we are a municipally owned and operated, but we are a regional water provider as well. If you look at our infrastructure, we have 4 interconnected water treatment plants, 11 secondary pump stations, 22 tanks and towers, 5,300 miles of main, and some of which are approaching its useful life. And so as we talk about infrastructure and financing and things of this type nature, you will see that it's certainly much more that we have to deal with going forward. The size of our service area. We have a very diverse area. We're incredibly diverse in our customer base. Our service area is more racially diverse than probably the state of Ohio. Nearly 35% of our customer base is more looking at the community as it performed in the U.S. Census, and you'll see that 26% of the income that our customers make is less than $25,000. And if you look at the other end of the spectrum, you'll see that 22%, it's somewhere over the income of $100,000. So in between, you can see all the other challenges that we face in terms of the varying levels of education, and of course, we have a high level of economic diversity as well. So, why is this important to the city of Cleveland? And we're focused on 4 challenges, and those challenges are affordability, and that's through equity, and we talked about a little bit about treatment and distribution and all the things that, you know, we treat, and next thing you know, it's coming out of your tap. And so a lot of people don't know what goes into that. Our aging infrastructure, we'll talk a whole lot about aging infrastructure as our infrastructure has reached its useful life in over 125 years, some even over 150 years. So we have some challenges there. Water quality. Water quality is key, not just in terms of the water quality and how we treat it and distribute it to our customers, but what we more are looking at is how we identify with the most vulnerable communities and giving them the confidence level that we have in terms of water quality. And that's what we're looking at. And workforce development is huge. We have retiring, and as we have an aging infrastructure, we also have an aging workforce. And in that workforce, you have retirements coming. So I'll talk a little bit later about some of the things we're doing in terms of workforce development. And I look forward to all your questions here in just a little bit. Thank you for your time.
All right, those were really great introductions, and to me, it seems, excuse me, daunting that we really have a lot of things to fix and to get better, things that we've just taken for granted for decades and decades and decades. And I think we've heard a lot about the aging infrastructure, and a lot of it we can see, right, with our bridges and things. But the water infrastructure is something that we don't see. Right? We only see it when water is pooling out of the sidewalks or the roads, and we're like, what's that?
Absolutely.
But that's when we have water line breaks, and so we just really take for granted that things work and things are going well. So I want to probe that a little bit more and learn what we can do as a community to help work on those problems. So the first question that I'd like each of you to talk a little bit about is, what do you think are some opportunities from the perspective of your organization to make inroads on these challenges? Is there any low-hanging fruit?
Well, I'll talk just.
That's a loaded question. It'll probably go on for hours. But
In terms of affordability, which is obviously huge, as we look at technology and we look at rate setting and billing frequency, you know, we have instituted an AMI project. And in terms of affordability, we were able to look at our leak detection rates and all the things, your usage and all of those things. And we probably sent out about 50,000 leak detection notices. And probably 90% of those 50,000 came off of the leak detection list. And so in terms of affordability, it's something that they caught that leak, they're checking their faucets, they're checking their toilets, they're checking everything to make sure that you know, they don't get that big bill by surprise. And so that's one of the things that we're talking about in terms of affordability, in addition to the affordability programs that we have. 40% it could reduce your bill by 40% based on your income and guidelines and things of that type nature. So it's a wide range of things that we do, but we need to keep the community engaged. We engage in about 100 community meetings a year, and so we keep engaged, and that's one of the things that we're doing in terms of affordability.
Okay.
Linda, yeah, what we've been attacking here the last couple of years is this concept of regionalization and shared resources. You know, I mentioned that there's 4,500 public water systems, so there's got to be some economies of scale out there that we can capture. So we kind of put kind of our attention a couple years ago. We're starting to make some inroads, and we're kind of doing it kind of case by case. It really is working with communities, working with all the funding agencies in Ohio. I'll give you a quick example of one, the city of Nelsonville down in southeast Ohio. Providing sewer, they were at capacity, their treatment plant was at capacity. We had 3 communities of unsewered communities, still on septic, individual septic tanks that were failing. They were all 3 of those communities were planning their own systems. And so the funding agencies, we kind of said, hey, you guys all need to start talking. You all need to start talking, and we'll help in the discussion. But you all need to start talking and see if we can do a regional approach. And we've done that. But what struck me is the meeting, our initial meeting down in Nelsonville, the village, everybody was there, 2 county commissioners from 2 different counties, these 3 incorporated areas, the city of Nelsonville. The village administrator, he broke the ice and said, hey, I can think of just what's good for the city of Nelsonville, he says, but I have to start thinking of what's good for the area. If it's good for the area, then it's good for Nelsonville. So, just knowing those communities, knowing that Nelsonville would be a good partner, they were success. And we are about 80%, those projects are about 80% funded now. It took several years through our funding cycles, and it really, because again, it's a low-income area. We had to maximize the grant money to make it affordable. And so that took several years as that grant money became available in each funding cycle. But it takes some planning and some congratulations. So we're focusing on that shared resources.
Let me jump in on this. I mean, I think that the leadership that's going on in Cleveland and Buffalo and Milwaukee and Atlanta and other places with the U.S. Water Alliance and others is really opening some doors about how to think differently and tell different stories about what this business is. Yes. And that's really exciting. And I think that if there's low-hanging fruit, it's reimagining what this enterprise is. It's finding ways to tell stories and look for those opportunities to take some risks with partners that can de-risk leadership. And regionalization is one of those. Equity is one of those. The introduction of new technologies and reimagining, particularly on the wastewater side, what we can do with collection systems to shave CapEx or shave capital expenses, all look like opportunities, but this is a long game. I mean, this is a long game. I can go on, but that's what feels like low-hanging fruit to me is leadership and looking for some unlikely allies to de-risk that, if I can. And I don't want to do this, but I'm fascinated by the asset management program here in Ohio, and this is a golly gee question that I haven't prepped my colleague about, but have you engaged the auditors to look at financial statements for these enterprises to be sure that the asset accounting standards match the asset management plans?
At this point, no. And that's a valuable piece. Especially in the smaller systems. I don't have to speak for the city of Cleveland. You've probably been doing asset management for a long time.
Right.
They've had to survive. The smaller entities, we're even below that with the smaller users and the smaller systems. We're happy that they have their own accounts of the water and sewer system, separate from the general operating fund of the village. Yeah. All right. So but you make a very good point, and that's definitely I need to think about that.
To take this out of inside baseball, the Government Accounting Standards Board has declared an accounting standard that says that utilities and municipal governments and others have to know their assets and then have to declare how they maintain or depreciate them. And they have a choice of maintaining them with sinking funds and reinvestment funds, or they simply declare them as wasting assets. The reason our region is facing a $178 billion bill is everybody has, through de facto or otherwise, chose to treat our underground infrastructure largely as a wasting asset. And that's the brilliance of an asset management scheme is it takes that and makes those decisions transparent. And when coupled with folks that have to sign off on audited financial statements, can be a real incentive to get compliance in this asset
Great idea.
management scheme.
Great idea.
So it's that counterintuitive partnerships. You never think a CPA has got a big role in sustainability until you find an opportunity for them to have a real big role in sustainability.
It's interesting. One thing I've kind of heard from all three of you, and I'd like to understand a little bit more about the U.S. Water Alliance and what it is and how the group came to be and be working together. But it sounds like a lot of these things are about collaboration and working together and bringing kind of what don't seem like they would be partners that would fit together and trying to figure out how to work together in new and different ways.
Absolutely.
So could one of you talk a little about the U.S.
I'll
Water
speak
Alliance?
to that just real briefly. I think community partnerships are absolutely key because we can't meet these challenges alone. We partnered with the Cleveland Housing Network, Cleveland Water Alliance, U.S. Water Alliance, and a host of others, and as we look at Erie Hack and we look at all of those things in terms of the Water Equity Task Force and all the things, so it's certainly a collaboration effort. It's a community outreach effort as well. And I think the partnerships, as you look at public-private partnerships, I can't stress enough how that we're moving towards that model because it works. If you look at the inclusion and diversity and all those things that you need to look at on a collaborative effort to make this thing kind of work, we understand that we face greater challenges than ever before. And so we face a lot of the similar challenges. And so when we can talk amongst one another and look at networking opportunities to grow, we have a lot of smart people out there. And if you look at your next door neighbor, you can probably get the answer that you're looking for. So I do believe that communication and education and outreach is certainly a key, coupled with partnerships and continuing to form those going forward.
So what could we do to help those things along? One thing I've heard a lot about these smaller systems, and the smaller systems just don't have resources. Like Kenya pointed out, there's declining populations. There's just not enough money to pay the bills. The things may be missized compared to when the population was what it was in its heyday. What can we do, or how can we work together? I've talked to a few utilities and what they see, the large utilities in the state of Ohio are the ones I'm familiar with, is when a small utility fails and makes it in the news, that hurts everybody, because everybody goes and grabs that water bottle rather than that tap water. When that tap water is meets regulations and is very safe to drink and is very reliable. So is there a place for the university in this to kind of help and deal with those things, to help message better?
Well, Linda, absolutely, there's a place for that. It's how do you convince the larger utility to go in and take over or help a failing system? There's a lot of risk with that failing system. There's a cost to that. They have to explain that to their existing customer base, and how do we want to take on a challenge? And I don't know, have you ever, I'm not familiar with this Cleveland, and if you've adopted any, gone outside and brought in any small communities or not,
Well,
and then how you address that.
I'm glad you asked. As I indicated earlier, we supply 80 communities, so we are a regional water authority. And we engage with them. We have what you call COG meetings with the mayors and administrators, and we get together monthly to talk about some of the challenges. We have direct service, we have master meter agreements, and all those type of things. But it's important to note that those meetings are very important. And as we start to engage in those type of meetings, we do understand that smaller systems have a problem with facing some of the challenges in terms of asset management and all the things that you have to do. So the City of Cleveland and Division of Water have always reached out and able to help, and we do a lot of education and outreach along with seminars to try kind of help educate them as well. And as you look at it from a financial standpoint, We're also taking over systems where we take over their system and then they don't have to worry about all the operation and maintenance associated with water main breaks and everything else when it comes to from a financial standpoint where that's concerned. So we do a lot of outreach there, and again, we serve 80 communities outside of the city of Cleveland.
If I can jump in and take this in a slightly different direction. I mean, one thing that may be a role for a university, or there may be a university partnership opportunity, is highlighted by some work that we've done with community foundations around the Great Lakes. There are community foundations scattered about the whole region. They're an invention of Cleveland. It's another thing, not just the electric traffic light, but the community foundations are another Cleveland invention. And they're community funds. It's the community chest. And we began working with them some time ago to ask the question, what are your environmental programming? I will connect this. What is your environmental programming? And they said, oh, we didn't have any. And we sat down with them and said, well, what are you doing with the Boy Scouts and all of this environmental work and this environmental work? What are you doing with local schools? Well, with this environmental education. So they were doing this work, and when we began to work with them to consolidate that, give it a name, it grew a donor base. And part of that donor base are the community leaders in this space that are beginning to facilitate the discussions on a watershed basis and on a community basis about how can we do water better? How can we look for opportunities for perhaps consolidation, if not consolidation, resource and knowledge sharing and expertise sharing? And it's been very rewarding. One of the gaps they face is they don't have the technical skills necessarily to have those conversations as deeply as they might wish. And for an extension service or outreach from engineering schools, that would be a great sort of place to intervene that isn't obvious. It isn't a oh, well, we'll go to the XYZ technical thing. It's the local community foundations. So I think there are those opportunities to make connections. I think that there's another opportunity that universities have, and that's better storytelling around public-private partnerships.
Absolutely.
Because the scary thing about that is they're selling the water. How can we stop them from selling water? And that isn't the case. Look, any financing that gets done has some kind of private participation in it. Not any, but most financing has private participation in it. Every water system is what? You guys know these stats better than I do. When you look at the water system, when you say, okay, what are the laterals? What are the connects? It's a huge, what is it, 50-50 in terms of miles in most systems of distribution and collection systems that are public and privately held. We need to think about these things as a system, and systems thinking is what university folks do very well. So that storytelling can be very helpful.
And I'd like just to add in terms of universities, just forums like this is a help as we look at more partnerships like this. There's already great things happening in the university, so we want you to share that knowledge with us and make sure that you stay engaged and look at graduate students and tackle these problems kind of head on and share that information with us, because obviously the more we know, the better that we do. And if we can all stay engaged, I think overall, from a holistic standpoint, we'll be able to move forward in a positive direction in terms of being viable, reliable, sustainable, and affordable.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we've learned over the last number of years is we need to have a better impact. And I think we're trying to work on, how can we show that impact better? How can we get our messaging out? And I think that's where, partnership would kind of help on both sides, as to learning who the right partners are to message to is part of that and getting at that. So speaking of that, who are the best partners? You talked about community foundations and trying to talk to and message with the community foundations a little bit better. Are there other partners that we should be thinking of and engaging with?
Can I jump in and
Yeah, you can.
set you up?
There's a lot.
There are a lot. So one of the best partners we've engaged with is People United for Sustainable Housing in Buffalo, New York, and Push Buffalo got their start as generating affordable housing and then moved into community workforce work. But they've really made a mark in Buffalo around green infrastructure development, green jobs development, and they're working in hand in glove with the water utility to drive down capital expenditures by integrating green and gray infrastructure in the wastewater system, and by taking those activities and being sure that folks are trained and can begin to grow the micro enterprises around that, the nurseries and the upkeep services and so on and so forth. So that's an example. There's a much longer list. Cleveland Botanic Gardens has done really interesting work in your neck of the woods with NERSD. So it's the partnerships are vast and not always intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say from a standpoint of, we talked a little bit about the Cleveland Water Alliance and
Right.
The nonprofit organization that leveraging water to kind of spur economic development and job creation. They have a contest called Erie Hack where students kind of come in and look at innovation in terms of the Great Lakes, and you look at Lake Erie, and they came up with some of the greatest things. We got buoys out in Lake Erie that's looking at harmful algae blooms and all of those things, the toxins, the sediments, and all of that information. And the context is everybody engaged in that process. So that's probably invaluable to the industry and what these young kids bring to the forefront, and that keeps us engaged and keeps us with hope that, hey, the kids are the future, and the technology and the innovation that they bring is priceless. And we're able to use some of that information. It's a tool, but what do you do with the information once you get it?
Right.
And start to monitor and then tell a story based on the information that we actually get from what they create. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Oh, that's very cool. I think we're getting close to the end. I think there's some breakout sessions that start at 9:30. So what is one, from each of you, I'm going to ask, what is one takeaway? You remember just a few things from a long talk. What is that one takeaway that we should remember from each of you in today? David, I'll start with you.
Oh, thanks. We need to reimagine our water systems. We need to think differently about them. We need to think about the blended nature of what they are. They're public, they're private. I challenge you to go outside and find one thing that you're walking on or looking at that isn't water infrastructure. Roads are water infrastructure, roofs are water infrastructure, sidewalks are water infrastructure. It's all about water. So we need to really rethink and challenge ourselves to think, to see our water with new eyes.
I think my takeaway is there's a cost to safe drinking water in the environment, and it's not a freebie. And we all have a responsibility in this room to understand that and move forward.
Well, I would say that our takeaway is as you look at the value of water and what that means in terms of the quality of life. And I don't think that, when you get up every day and you're able to turn on that tap and that water is there, our job is service delivery. And that's what we do. And it's what we do, and it's taken for granted because it's always there. You never know the word for water until your well runs dry. Right. And so we take these things for granted, but I think it's important to make sure that everybody understands what goes into that process and to help us make that better, because what we're looking at is a safe drinking water that meets and exceeds all rules and regulations set forth by the Ohio EPA and the Safe Drinking Water Act. And that's what we do, and we do it seamlessly and timelessly, and we get it done. So I just want to make sure that we continue to engage in institutions as well as universities and all the other organizations that are out there, AMWA and AWWA and WEF and all of those organizations, and come to a lot of those things that we have that's out there that we engage in. And I think the takeaway is that, water is the key to life.
Excellent. That's a great way to end. I want to thank all three of our panelists for a great conversation this morning. If you have any questions for them, come up after this is done and speak with them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.